I don't like most people like that guy. So many protesters are self-important, intrusive. I want to shut them up. But I can't, thanks to the First Amendment. Americans can say most anything. The only limits are you can't directly incite violence. You can't incite a mob by saying, let's go kill that guy. You can't shout fire in a crowded theater. You also can't harass people like a stalker does. And you can't cheat people by lying about something. But aside from limits like those, you can say that. The First Amendment prohibits government from stopping people from speaking. And that's helped keep America free. Today, however, both Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton want new limits on speech, especially during elections. Both also want to ban flag burning. Isn't that a form of speech, burning a flag? And both have talked about censoring the internet to protect against terrorism. Here's Trump on that.
Closing that internet up in some way. Somebody will say, oh, freedom of speech, freedom of speech. These are foolish people. We have a lot of foolish people. We have a lot of foolish people.
Well, here's one, Camille Foster of Free Think Media. I guess Trump thinks you're foolish. And he says, there's people complaining about free speech. Who needs it?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Both Donald Trump and candidate Hillary Clinton are very, very vociferous about this. They think that we are at unique danger. We have unique risks associated with people like ISIS and various other bad, nefarious people saying nasty things on the internet.
They have a point.
But the bottom line here is that freedom of speech isn't about speech that we all like, speech that we all think is great. It's about protecting speech at the margins. And there is a standard here. And the speech has to present a clear and present danger before we're in a position to stop people from actually saying these things on the internet.
But ISIS is a clear and present danger. And if people are saying, come join us, what's the harm in saying we're going to censor that?
Every time we've seen in history, we've seen people pass laws that are supposed to keep us safer, that with all of the best intentions, they often end up getting abused by government and various other entities.
The Alien and Sedition Acts.
Absolutely.
Founders passed them, and that they really were saying, don't criticize us.
Absolutely. Yeah, the principle there was supposed to be that you couldn't say things that were untrue, that would actually make it hard for the country to defend itself. Instead, they went after their political opponents with it.
Here's one of Trump's promises that directly affects me. He wants to rewrite libel law.
So that when the New York Times writes a hit piece, which is a total disgrace, or when the Washington Post, which is there for other reasons, writes a hit piece, we can sue them and win money instead of having no chance of winning because they're totally protected. You see, with me, they're not protected because I'm not like other people.
By I'm not like other people, he means I'm filthy rich and I can go ahead and sue and intimidate.
If the president, if the government is in a position to simply sue people who are in the press who write things about them that they don't like, not that aren't true. What Donald Trump has talked about is people who are writing bad things, who are being mean, who aren't treating him fairly.
But even if they make mistakes and say things that aren't true, with a public figure, if you're not malicious, you can get away with that. If you're just careless.
With libel, you actually have to have some intent there. There has to be intent. What Donald Trump, when he talks about opening up libel laws, he's creating a situation in which when people say things you don't like, you can simply sue them. Even the threat of a lawsuit can create an environment in which people don't feel free to express certain opinions. The threat alone should make Americans nervous. I mean, Donald Trump has not been in office before, so he doesn't have a record we can look at there. But he has a track record of taking people to court and keeping them there for a very long time for writing things he doesn't like.
People, one of his Miss USA contestants criticized the pageant. He sued her for $5 million. She later told USA Today the suit demonstrated Trump's bullying tactics. To shut her up.
Absolutely.
He also sued a New York Times reporter who said Trump wasn't as rich as he said he was. Trump lost, but Trump said, ultimately, I had great success doing what I wanted to do, costing the reporter a lot of legal fees.
And if someone will do that when they are a private citizen, I shudder to think that they'll do when they have the resources of the Justice Department at their disposal.
No politician likes criticism, and they especially hate it around election time. The McCain-Feingold campaign finance rules were supposed to reduce money spent in politics. But at election time, money is speech. Money gets the word out. When Hillary first ran for president, a group spent money to make this film that criticizes her.
What drives Hillary now is power. She very much is interested in gaining power. She considers herself to be a special person.
Yes, she does, and she didn't like that movie. And the movie wasn't allowed to air on TV before the election. The government, citing McCain-Feingold, said, you can't run that so close to the election. Later, after the election, the Supreme Court said the government was wrong. Banning the movie violated the First Amendment. And that was called the Citizens United decision. And the left is furious about it.
We will overturn Citizens United once and for all.
What Citizens United really says is that when people get together in corporations or unions, they don't surrender any of their rights, that they still have the same right to speech. And with speech here, we are in fact talking about spending money and getting involved in politics.
Hillary has another example where she's anti-free speech. Years ago, she tried to get legislation passed that would ban selling violent video games to people under 18.
She's got such a bad track record when it comes to this. Hillary Clinton has actually gone after films, rap music, video games. Maybe there is a danger involved in some of these things. What is important here is that while Hillary Clinton has been vociferously advocating for various forms of censorship across her career, she's also been consistently rebuffed by the Supreme Court, who has often thrown out pieces of legislation that she has supported and taking out unconstitutional
until she gets to nominate her judges, which could be a problem. Could happen. Today, the newest threat to free speech is harassment law. Now, we're all against harassment. It's mean, but who gets to decide what's illegal harassment and what's just a different opinion or a tradition? This Revolutionary War flag, which says, "Don't tread on me," is sometimes used as a Tea Party symbol. Recently, a black postal worker filed a racial harassment complaint because a coworker wore a cap with that flag on it. He said the flag is racist because it was designed by a slave owner.
If there isn't a material danger, a clear and present danger, which is the current standard according to the courts, then that's not a place where the government should be taking any action.
Well, as a black man with a flag like this designed by a slave owner, or the Confederate flag, isn't that a hostile workplace?
It is someone's subjective opinion whether or not they will be offended by that. I would say that whether or not it's a hostile workplace, you certainly have a choice to go work elsewhere or appeal to your employers. There are any number of things that you can do, but whether or not that means we actually need new laws in order to limit speech is an entirely different matter.
The website that broke the story about the flag was this blog, the Volokh Conspiracy. It's the best blog on free speech. I turn to it whenever there are complex debates about speech. It's written by UCLA law professor Eugene Volokh. Eugene, what's the harm in government saying we want racial harmony? We don't want these flags.
Well, the government, under the First Amendment, doesn't get to decide which viewpoints it can suppress, even viewpoints that people see as offensive. Used to be the government was saying, oh, we want to ban Confederate flags. That, too, is unconstitutional, I think, for the government to say that workplaces all over the country must forbid the display of the symbol.
But
now
they
it's
have
stretching
done that,
to
right?
this revolutionary flag. So there is a EEOC decision that in fact says that display of the Confederate flag it does create a racially hostile environment, or may create it, and therefore should be banned. I think that violates the First Amendment. I think if a private employer wants to forbid that, it generally can. But if a private employer wants to allow it, you know, there could be a Dukes of Hazzard themed bar. The fact that it's offensive doesn't give the government a right to suppress it. A lot of times these cases don't get to the point where there's a real First Amendment challenge being brought. A lot of these claims, especially in private workplaces, are pretty quickly settled out because employers would rather just suppress the employee's speech than to fight it out and try to protect their employees' First Amendment rights.
Of course, when government comes after the business knows it could cost hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars to fight it. So they just say, okay, whatever you want.
Totally. That's one of the dangers of this kind of harassment law. By going after the intermediary, going after not the speaker, but the employer, it creates an extra level of chilling effect because the people who are the defendants in these cases have all the incentive in the world to shut up the private speech on their property and very little incentive to protect it.
Recently, in the name of gender equality, New York City and Washington, D.C. passed rules that require us to call someone Z instead of he or she if that person wants to be called Z. You can be fined if you don't.
First, there's something wrong, I think, about the government redefining the language. Pronouns are a pretty basic part of the language, telling us we have to say new words. They're essentially endorsing a particular viewpoint. They're endorsing the viewpoint that this person is neither a man or a woman, or is some unusual mix of the two. And a lot of people don't want to endorse that viewpoint. Just like people are entitled not to display live free or die on their license plates, that's a Supreme Court decision from about 40 years ago, so they should be entitled not to have to actually say with their own mouths words that convey an ideological viewpoint that they disapprove of. Imagine somebody try to say something similar with regard to religion. Somebody says, I belong to this religion, we should be called the only true saints. So please call me the only true Saint Wallach.
Or Your Highness.
Say, well, wait a minute. Right, Your Highness or Lordship. And I think people could say, well, wait a minute. You know, if you think of yourself that way, that's perfectly fine. But if you're trying to compel me to endorse your view of Your Highness, that's something that I shouldn't be coerced into doing.
These rules from human rights commissions, they just apply to people who work for the government?
Oh, no, no, no. The New York City rules make clear that they apply to all private employers, and they apply to owners of private places of public accommodation and to landlords. So if you go into a restaurant and you refer to one of the waiters as he or she, and the waiter prefers to be called Z or one of a lot of other pronouns that people are inventing, then the restaurant has to tell you, stop saying that, stop talking about my employee this way, or we'll kick you out. And if the restaurant doesn't say that to you, then the employee can sue the restaurant for tolerating a hostile environment.